Welcome again to another Downtown Orlando UX. Thank you all for coming. It is July already. We are halfway through the year. Can you all believe it? Thank you all for joining. Switzerland, I think, is the farthest someone is visiting us from here this evening. So thank you for tuning in. We are recording this. So if you want to tune in later, we do post many of these out to YouTube when we're able to. So feel free to check all of those prior recordings out when you get a chance. And for those of you that are new to Downtown Orlando UX, our mission is to create opportunities for anyone to learn and share knowledge about the field of user experience. You do not have to be in the field, you can have an interest in it. Maybe you're a developer or a PM, or just want to know more about what we're about. It's a great way to learn more about the space and maybe find out if there are opportunities that could interest you as you move forward in your career. Also, if you connect with one of our core co-organizers, they're not all here tonight, but Leah has her camera on and I'm here. And thank you to our non-present Jason right now. He is in Chicago on a business trip, and it's great that he was able to hop in right before the meeting to say hi to a few of us. We miss you, Jason. Some housekeeping, if possible, if you could turn your camera on, please. You can raise your hand, or I don't know, Minseon, if you would welcome people just kind of interjecting with questions, or will you have a question section at the end?
I have Q&A section at the end.
Okay, so but there might be some interactivity too. I think Minseon has shared a link to a Fig Jam out there in the chat. We'll repost it one more time right before we jump into that. But also ask questions in the comments. We'll be monitoring the comments and try to bring some of those up toward the end if possible. And if for some reason we don't, feel free to chime in. And love for you to meet Minseon. Minseon has been coming to Downtown Orlando UX for some time. She mentioned earlier that she started her career by connecting with us here, and we have enjoyed being able to connect with Minseon over the years and really are happy that she stayed connected with us even though she has left the Orlando area. And she has, as you can see, she has experience with a lot of different networks. And Minseon, maybe I'll let you give a little bit more background about yourself and then introduce us to what we'll be doing tonight.
Sure, that sounds great. So I am Minseon, UX designer. So I actually have a slide for myself in the mural board that I was going to go over, but then this is fine.
We can jump right into that if you want to.
Really, should we do that then?
Sure.
That might make it a little easier.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, so I mean, you can share mural from not the mural, the Fig Jam from your end. I can just
okay.
Walk everybody through while I can make sure everyone is staring at the same one as I am. All right, if I click my name, spotlight me, and so you guys should see the diary study page and right now. Do you see that?
We can. 3
people are following. 4. All right, everybody, accept me, follow me. I sent you invite, I think, on Fig Jam. All right, numbers going up, just to make sure that everybody's on the same screen that I'm staring at.
And I'm sharing it here too, so they can
okay
see.
All right, that's great. All right, so introduction again. So I started my career connecting with Matt Lavoie back in, like, I don't know, like 7-8 years ago in Orlando. Like I went to a coding boot camp. It was for developers. And then he was there as a speaker for usability testing. And I'm like, oh, I must listen this, this must be interesting. And that was my first time hearing anything about how to say, modern days usability testing, how it is actually conducted utilizing tools. And so that was really intriguing. And so I connected with him, and then I was invited to the meetup and started going to meetup, and then really learned more about depth deeper into more of a user research and stuff. And so that's how I started my career. And that's why I'm here today to return some of the favor that I received from community to you all, so you guys can learn together with me at the same time. And then hopefully there's some other good things come out of it. And I initially studied industrial design back in South Korea. So all my classmates, they are now working for Samsung or LG, working on electronic designs or gadgets or cell phone. And sometimes people go work for automobile companies, but then I'm like one of the odd one who's in the UI UX industry. I just found that it's fascinating because prototype testing and making it takes like a couple hours, you know, in the UX UI world, whereas for physical tangible industrial design it takes months, depends on which tool you're using, and so it's just like testing part of it was fascinating. So I kind of switched over, and then I am currently interested in gaming UX UI design. I just say that not because I am really into making any games and stuff, but by sharing it openly to like all you all, I'm like encouraging myself to keep my word. Okay, I said I'm interested in gaming design. I must study some more about it. I should do something about it. This is give me a nudge. So that's who I am. And then we will have some Q&A time later, and then ask me any question that you are curious about that I can answer. Okay. All right. So today we're going to talk about diary study. And in the beginning, I'll probably we'll go over what diary study is, so you guys can have idea what it is and how it can benefit your work or any user study you have. And then diary study details about so then how I did the diary study at the my work, USAA, the bank. And then we will have a Q&A session in the end. All right, with that. So here is some interactive exercise I can do with you all. I'll give maybe 3 minutes. So please share a time when you kept a journal. What did you use it for? And what was it like to go back and look at it? Pick up any of the stickies on the board and start writing it. And then you can also drag and drop more stickies from the bottom of your screen if you need more stickies, and start writing it for me, please. Yeah, and this is a moment when I would say music, please. But yeah, we don't have that today. It's okay.
Yeah.
It is fine. All right, everybody's writing. This is really nice. So let's see. I keep a journal of my stand-up daily for each day. That's good. Each day, that is important. Wrote in a journal as a kid. My mom made me. Oh, yeah, I know. My mom and my teacher all made me to do it too. Kept a blog that I used as a blog while I was in exchange students in Korea. Oh, somebody was in Korea. That's great. That is cool. And personally, I try to take 10 minutes to journal every day. Brainstorming. I want to see more about how it feels like when you look back. Can somebody share? Yeah, first was in elementary school and then was until senior year in college. So do you still have that diary that you wrote in elementary school, Bianca?
I got Spotify to work.
No, I don't have that journal anymore. Yeah, I usually throw them away. But some of them are cute to look back on when I did look at them. So.
So how was it when you look back on? Like, what part of it was so cute?
I think the design of the actual journal is cute. So And I think also my grammar wasn't really that good. So there was some humor looking back on just the way I
cool.
structured my sentences. But growing up, I didn't want to keep any of those journals because sometimes it goes into some darker feelings, which is good sometimes to let it out. But I didn't keep those either.
Gotcha. So it had some emotional side of it, and it has some cute side of like, oh, this was how I used to write, and that was cute. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, and then I see someone, Bobby Bishop, saying tried and failed at keeping a journal. We'll go back there. That is a really good point. It's really hard to keep journaling every day. And that is actually one of the challenges of the diary study that I'm going to walk you through later. Okay, anybody else wants to share how it was like when you look back? You can turn a microphone. Anybody else?
When you, so when I journal and then I go back and I look at what I've written before, sometimes time will give me more clarity or will give me more time to build out my ideas some more, because by then I would have thought about it for some time. Yeah, a good example for this is like, sometimes you're in the middle of an argument and you can't think of a good comeback, but then you go away and you think about it for a little bit, and then you can think of a good argument after it's already happened. That's how I treat journaling, I think.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is it is a really good tool for a self-reflection as well. It gives you an idea. Yeah, that is great. All right, we can move on. And thank you for writing all these amazing notes. I love this session. You guys are very active. Okay. So diary study. So what is diary study? We kind of touched upon what it is by sharing our experience. So it is just a way of collecting data from study participants. It can be users or customers, anybody who's participating in your study. This is the really important part. Not just one time, but throughout the period of time, over time. So this study is happening over time, not just a one day, not just an hour, okay? So typical diary participants, it is self-report their behavior and frustrations and emotions and thoughts and all that stuff. So it is very similar in that sense that interview, it's also self-reported user research tool. It's not somebody else is watching you and recording you. No. You are the person who's talking about yourself, your emotions, and your thoughts, okay? And then this is often used for generative research, not for evaluative research, which is to prove whether your design is working or whether your design is better. Diary studies to reveal the insights, to find interesting things about user behaviors or user thoughts and feelings, to see if there's an opportunity for your teams to build. So that is a bit different. So when we think about diary studies, the traditional method is more of a writing on the note with pen and pencil, with a notebook. But these days, there's like a lot of new apps and tools evolved. So it is not limiting participants from just writing. You can also record it, your face, and then all these environments. And sometimes you can just turn off and do the voice as well. And the really great part of modern days tool is that allowing the researcher to interact with the participants real time. Okay, so traditionally, I'll tell you, back in the days, diary study has been conducted using physical notebooks. So the researchers will carefully pack up the notebook and everything that's related with instruction and mail it off to the participants. And participants write down diaries for about a month or so, and then mail it back to the researcher. And then researchers will review it for how many days that they have, and schedule a follow-up meeting with the participants to ask questions about part that they were not clear about. Because as I said, it's a self-reported tool. Therefore, there's a jargons and situations outside person cannot really understand. So things need to be cleared, right? So they did it in very manual way. But nowadays, the participants can record a diary right there and then send, and immediately the researcher can receive it. And when there's a question, researcher can start texting or messaging the participant back in the platform, and so participant can clarify what was going on. So it's very fast paced. So that is huge, how to say, advancement that's made over the time period with the cell phone. So that's a difference here. Okay, so when to do diary study? Probably as designers and researchers, this might be interesting. So I have 4 things to go over here. So when the behaviors or actions of the interest happened sporadically or in unplanned moments, meaning it's not schedulable. So let's say you're doing an interview as a part of user research. You have to schedule the time and day and then a location, and then make sure that person shows up so you can interview that person, right? If you are looking to find odd behavior or surprising behavior that can only triggered by an event that you cannot plan for, then there's no way you can catch that moment while you're interviewing that person. So for that kind of interaction that you want to catch, it's better to use diary study. That's what it meant by the moments that's sporadically happening or unplanned. And the other thing is when the behaviors or actions are part of a series or flow, which takes place over time, the diary study can be very helpful. So the line of business that I am currently working for at the bank is loan, like mortgage loan. So for the United States, for anybody to take a loan to buy a home, it takes about 30 days average for any lenders that you go through. 30 days. For my company, it takes 38 days minimum. Okay, so for that matter, if we were to really understand how customers go through the loan process during the 38 days, we really need to do some kind of research that can capture that long period of time experience. If we go back and interview them months or years later, what happens is that they only remember the last impression based upon peak and rule. If you heard about that behavior psychology rule, they only remember the part that they was most frustrated, and then the part they were most happy at the end when they had a key for their home. But what matters for designers is not just that, but all these nitty-gritty details that can make differences in your software design. And that part we miss out if we interview them like years later. So we chose to do the diary study for that matter. And then another reason is when the research aims to understand change over time, which is very similar to what I just explained. And the other thing is very important. When there are reasons, direct observation is not an option for the study. So for this type of study, somebody might have thought, hey, wait a minute, there's something called field study. Diary study is not the only tool that you can use to observe users' behavior over the time period of time. You can go sit next to the person and then watch the person all day long, so you can capture those unexpected moments to occur. Why can't you do that? Well, because not everybody's comfortable with somebody watching you for 24/7, and therefore they might not behave naturally. They might not willing to participate in the study at all. So in those cases, diary study actually is a better alternative option. Okay, another exercise time. So I mentioned lots of different tools like interview, usability studies, and surveys. These are called the one-off studies. This can happen in a day, in an hour, depends on. It's not a series of the studies that has to take over time. However, each study comes with pros and cons. So I'd like you guys to write down, what do you think the positive side of user interviews and usability studies and surveys, or what do you think some of the cons of those studies? Yeah, you can just feel free to write down whatever you think it is. To give you some hints, you can think about financially, you can think about time-wise, you can think about convenience for participants, things like that. Awesome. So on the pro side, I see we can see users' body language, and we can see gestures. Okay, and cheaper. Yes, it can be very cheap. And quick. We can adapt the study to the research that is relevant to what we are working on right now. Quicker result for sure. More communication and we can understand the user more. More live questions. All right, moving on to cons. Not able to access certain demographics. Oh, I want to hear more about that. Please. Who wrote that?
I wrote it.
Please.
So I was just thinking, like, what if, certain people are like really busy, like Monday through 5, and like this, if the interviews are done on not Monday through 5 or something, and like people, like some demographic people won't be able to like take time off work. I was thinking things like that.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. So I can support that. For diary study, a lot of people were participating after work hours. So in the case, this makes total sense. You're right. And then, oh, thank you for sharing, by the way, Michelle. All right, requires access to tools. Sometimes, all right, might not think to mention important things. Yes, who was that? Participants might not think to mention important things.
I think that was me.
Yes, that is a really important part of it. I want to hear from you. What made you think that way?
Oh, just because sometimes when you do some research, you might ask questions to people and they might not think about something that to them is insignificant, but to you actually matters a lot. And you would have observed it if you observe the people, but when you ask them, they just don't think about it because it's so small to them, but to you it means a lot.
Yeah, that is a really good point. So that happens a lot in the interviews on spot. When you place people on spot, people don't necessarily have triggers to remember everything. And then memory is fickle. People remember things wrong. So here's a study, that's interesting study has been done about 9/11. So there's a group of reporters who interviewed a bunch of people who lost their family members and loved ones during the 9/11, almost right after the tragedy happened. And they kept that recorded version of the interview. And 10 years later, they found them back and then conducted the same questions, interviewed again to them. And interestingly enough, their memory remembered things differently. And that tells a lot about how people remember things differently, and they won't be able to give you clear and like the answer that's supposed to be at the right in the interview setting. So yeah, that one was a really good point, by the way.
And to add on to that as well too, with the interviews, I mean, it's not only do people remember things differently, that's definitely true. They also will like give you answers based off of like what they say their behaviors are on kind of like what they hope they're doing. Like I'll give you an example, or like if you ask someone how many hours of Netflix do they watch a week, they may say something like 2 or 3 hours, versus if you say something like, hey, tell me what you watched last week. And then they might be like, well, actually, maybe I watched like 6 or 7 hours. Maybe it wasn't 0 or 30, they kind of put something in their head, I'm guilty of that too, as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And that exact bias happens in surveys as well. So that's why it is so important to make the right question in the survey to get the right answer. Otherwise, people will just check on the box that they think or they want to be.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you guys for these awesome answers. Let's move on because I have another exercise right next to it. Okay, now this time let's talk about pros and cons of longitudinal studies, which is field studies and diary studies. Most of these answers, you can find the opposite answers to what you wrote down on the other side of slides, and then that is probably correct. But I want to still hear from you guys. Yes, so somebody said we cannot completely verify the truthfulness of diary submission. Who's that, please? Am I putting too many
That was
people
me.
on the spot? Oh, thank you. How do I say your name?
It's Kajedo.
Kajedo. So please, can you tell me more about what you write there?
So when you give somebody something to do and they're not under any kind of supervision, or you're not there to observe them or to verify whether or not this is what it is, they could probably tell you what they think you want to hear. Like they'll write stuff down based off of based off of whatever it is that they're reviewing. They might tell you what they think you want to hear, which kind of skews your data.
So the reason why I wanted to hear from you is actually this is the self-report problem of any other tools. So this is not just a diary studies issue. This is also an issue for interview as well, because you can answer any questions that's asked to you with whatever way that you want to answer, not necessarily that is true, right? But then I wanted to bring that up because this is a good point about some of the self-report research. So thank you. All right, so let's moving on and see who else wrote down. People's thoughts as it happens, more real time. Yes, for sure, real time. Field study, you can observe actual behavior, don't have to rely on self-report. Yes, so that is the field studies, not the diary study, but you got that point right. Small insights may be brought to light that may never be captured otherwise. That is really important. And I have other slides talking about that importance of that, the small insights in this hot market, saturated market full of the similar products. So thank you for bringing that up. May take a lot of effort to synthesize. Yes, I'll tell you about the pain points of this study later. And then, yeah, the person who wrote that got it right. And nobody mentioned about the price, how expensive it can be. And it takes time. Yes, can be bad ROI if not well thought out. Correct. I'll tell you everything about how a study can go wrong later. Okay, so I think we have good answers here. I'd like to move on if you guys are okay, unless anybody wants to share anything before I move on to another slide. Okay, I'll move on. Diary study challenges. Some of you guys already brought this up. Too much data. This was no kidding. So I'll tell you, we interviewed 18, we scheduled 18 people. We asked 18 people to log daily diary study. So between 1 to 2 minutes of video for 3 months, 90 days. So you can do math how many videos that my team has to go over and analyze 18 times 90. And that alone is overwhelming. On top of that, we had to conduct follow-up research because of the problem that I mentioned in the beginning. They use internal jargons, and not everybody necessarily describe everything in detail. Therefore, some of the information is very hard to capture and understand. So you have to have a follow-up interviews. And we scheduled 3 follow-up interviews, so once per month to catch up with each participant. And that's still a lot because you have to do that 18 times 3. And we only had like 5 people in the team. So to minimize the impact of too much data, it was very important to decide between, so how big or how small the data set has to be. So instead of asking them to record a 10 minutes long video every day, we minimize it to 1 to 2 minutes. And how often should they record, should we go out and interview them? Instead of doing it every week or every 2 weeks, we set it to every month to minimize the impact of large data, because we have limited researchers and designers in the team who can work together on this matter. And the other problem can be high dropout rate. So typically it's a 20 to 30% of people who participated in the study will just give up, because somebody in the beginning wrote down, it was very hard to write diary every day, remember? And it's same to even for the paid study. It's hard because like you come home after 9 hours of working and you're tired. Oh, and now you have to log a diary for this study. And so they decide to skip. And eventually they keep skipping, and then they call us and say, no, I don't want to participate anymore. This was too much commitment. I didn't expect it to be too hard. And the thing is, we had even more hardship because you see, if the Fed increased the interest rate 3 times this year alone, and it impacted mortgage rate, and now it surged up to 2% to almost 6 or 7%. That's like 3 times higher, and people just decided not to buy a home anymore, and they stopped dropping the study. So we actually had more than 50% of dropout rate for this study, had to re-recruit people over and over again. And this was unexpected completely. We were not able to manage that expectation during the recruitment. So we had to continue to just spend money and then keep recruiting and hoping that it doesn't run out our budget. And getting people to consistently log entries was also very challenging. So we have design ops, which are dedicated people, employees whose work is to plan the design research and follow up with the participants, make sure everything is going well. And they had to literally nudge them almost every 3 days and saying, hey, I don't really see your daily log. Where is it? Are you doing all right? And so it's kind of very awkward, but then the nudge was very necessary. And then, yeah, that was part of challenge as well. All right, moving on. I want to tell you more about how we did diary study. So for daily video logs, we asked these 3 questions. We could have asked a lot more questions, but we decided to minimize it down to 3 because of the overwhelming data issue at the end, okay? So the first question we asked them to share is, what did you do related to home buying today? And the second was, how did you feel about it? And third one was, any thoughts? And it resembles very close to everybody's familiar with empathy map, right? This is one of the designer 101 tool. If you're a designer, UX designer, you should have heard about this at least once. So empathy map is a great tool for designers to capture sentiments over time for the users and see which part of the journey that user felt the most frustration, so we can find the pain points or how they behaved or thought about, so we can get insights. So we technically intentionally ask these questions to the users so we can later combine it with the user's journey so we can extract the emotional changes over time. There's many different ways that you can plan your diary study, but for this particular home buying journey, we did it so we can capture the emotional changes. All right, so this was what we originally envisioned. Okay, this is a user's journey, and then we're going to have ups and downs, probably here somewhere. Looks beautiful, so we can now share our insights to the team for the better design, right? But then what really happened is different, but I want to show you this first. So that's how other journey map looks like when you Google a journey map. It's usually single line going on with either happy face or sad face in the middle. And that's pretty much it you will see in any journey maps you will Google. But this is actually what happened with our study. So this is a single participant. I'm not even talking about 18 participants. Single participants will have multiple line of emotions going on for different type of things that triggers it. So let's say one day this person will say in the video, there are many houses, there are not many houses in the market, but I'm trying to be hopeful. So it's kind of yellow, it's kind of middle. And then this person will say, oh, well, I'm really worried to see the mortgage rate going up. So it's like anxiety going on. It's all captured in the one day, the same log. But then you can't really say, oh, this person's emotion averages out to anxiety. So I'm just going to make it red and ugly face and then call it good as anxiety. You can't do that. You're losing out all these details if you do that. And then this person is talking about completely different two things and completely two different feelings associated with that. Another day, this person might say, oh, appraisal is scheduled. We can close on time. I'm so excited. And so the regular journey map will say, okay, this is happy face. But then later on in the same video, this person will say, oh, I'm living off of the luggage because we are all packed and I can't even cook. This is terrible. And so there's a frustration all expressed on the same video. And so if I sum it up and create a yellow card saying, okay, it's 50-50%, it's meh, it's not good, it's not bad, neither of them, then I'm losing all this sentiment that we are capturing, right? So I have to figure out a way to carry over all these details. And by doing so, we were able to validate some of the interviews that we conducted with the users. So here I have a question to you all. When you do affinity diagram out of interview settings or usability tests, how do you validate your data that the insight that you found out through those affinity diagram sessions? Anybody? No one? Wes, I'm just going to put you on the spot because you got the most experience. You are muted.
There we go. All right. Ask me the question again and I'll do my best.
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at the screen, therefore I didn't know if there were people raising hands. I'm sorry. So after Wes, we can talk to you.
Yeah, we do have someone that has chimed in here.
I'm trying to read his name or her name. I can't. I'm so sorry. Can somebody help?
Hey, hi. That's Vidya. You can call me V.
V. Okay. So after Wes, we can ask you the question. So the question
Absolutely.
the question was, Wes, how would you validate your insight that you drew from synthesis session affinity diagram? You're muted again.
Sorry about that. I guess, one of the techniques that I've done is I've gathered similar information. I've sent them together and then found like item results and then map those out through diagramming. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the way I would normally do it.
Thank you for sharing. So you're conducting extra research to validate your insight that's drawn from previous research. That's what I'm hearing.
Gathering those together, finding similar behaviors. Yeah.
Thank you. And Vid, it's your turn. Sorry to see your hands just too late.
That's okay. I was just wondering when you mentioned about the empathy map, do we have to do a user interview apart from the diary study? Because I feel diary study is more or less a user interview, except for the fact that they are not in front of you and you can ask, live questions.
You're right. That's a really good point. So the reason the follow-up is really important in diary study, you can do it in any settings, doesn't have to be interview, is because people tend to use their internal words when they describe the situation their own way. So they're recording it themselves. They're not communicating with you when they're recording diary study. So there are moments that as a third person who's watching it later, you just can't understand what this person is talking about. And so you have to follow up. You can text them, you can message them through email, you can do any other tools, doesn't have to be interview, but then follow up is required for that matter, if that answers you.
Yeah, that answers my question. Now that after Wes spoke, I have another question. So I thought affinity diagram is something that we create after this user interview and diary study and everything. So in every step of the way, if there is any question, do you have to again conduct a user interview or contact the users in order to, clarify something or validate the data or anything of that sort? Because I thought, according to my understanding, I thought user interview is something that we do in the beginning and we do not disturb the users after that at all.
So that's also a very good question. So I have two answers for that. So for diary studies, we did not have to follow up with them at all because we had so much robust data that answers everything about our synthesized insights that we drawn from an interview session, which is a follow-up session. So we were able to validate these answers to make sure, oh, we weren't wrong about drawing these insights. So we didn't have to follow up interviews with them. But if you were conducting one of the interviews and you still have questions at the end, I highly recommend to ask your participants at the end of the interview that whether it is okay for you to reach out to them when you have a further questions. Otherwise, I'll give you an example of the situation. Let's say you close the study and then as you are synthesizing and analyzing your data, you guys started having questions. Oh, was this participants talking about this or that? And then nobody can really clearly remember. And if you are not going back and ask the question, you have to synthesize based upon your guess, and that is dropping the accuracy of your study. And your study, you spent how many hours and how much money you budgeted for is not really used for good. So you're risking a value of research by not following up with the user in that case. So in my opinion, it is pretty, how do I say, nice way to go follow up with the user to make sure your study is done in the right way. Did it answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Minseon, do you find yourself going back and looking at the recordings, or is that still like maybe we're interpreting what we heard on the recording or not?
So we utilize the follow-up interviews for those questions. So think about it. We we collected a month full worth of diary study. And then we have the interview scheduled after a month. So we have a bunch of questions to ask them, right? So we validate the first round of question there. And then we have another sets of diary recorded for the next month. And then we have another interview schedule. So we validate that as well. And then here's another thing. We did synthesis session at the end of all of these. And then, you have an insights found like, oh, people are having a hard time in the hot market. Okay, is it true or not? You go back to individual diaries that happened every day, and you hear the voice from each individual participants complaining about hot market. That supports your insight right there. So you know for sure this is the right insight that we went through. So it's like multiple way that you can validate. So yes, diary study comes with a lot of data, but there's a positive certain pros for that part of it for sure.
Cool, thank you.
No, not at all. All right. So moving quickly, I kind of want to touch
I have a quick
upon-
question, if you don't
Sure,
mind.
go ahead. Mhm.
How do you know how many participants you would need to validate, like, so it's significant, that you know that it's actually representative of the population and not just a small set?
I totally understand your question. That is one of the most commonly asked question for any qualitative researchers, because people come and ask you, how are you sure that your study is valid when you only talk to 12 people and we have thousands of users for our application? How are you sure about that, right? I'll tell you this. So qualitative research, the purpose of the qualitative research is to explore, to understand what opportunities, what pain points that's out there that you can potentially find out that you can dig deeper into. That is the entire purpose of qualitative research. Now, when it comes to prove whether it is going to work on 10,000 users or not, that purpose is to prove whether it is going to work or not. It is not for qualitative research that you need to go to quantitative research realm for that matter. So for the qualitative research, the reason 12 people, 18 people, 20 people works is because those number sets of people, by deep diving into their behaviors and answers, that you can still see the opportunities, like shining the insights that you can dig deeper, bring into the team, say, hey, I found something interesting. It might be worth to dig deeper. Do you want to hire like screener people to, let's say, recruit 10,000 people to ask about this particular question and see if this is valid insight or not? Now we're walking into realm of validating your interest that you found through the 12 people's interview. Okay, so I hope I answered you. That's how you know whether 12 is enough or 20 is enough. But here's the thing. For qualitative research, you still have to get to a certain number to see data saturation, okay? Let's say you talk to 6 people. You interviewed 6 people, and then 6 people came with 6 different answers, and there's no common answer among 6 people. Then we call it, there's no data saturated. Therefore, there's no interesting insight that you can even dig deeper into or go find more people to validate. But let's say you hired 12 people and 8 people came up with all the same answers, or 9 people came up with all the same answers, and there were like 3 people that were a little different. Then we call it, oh my God, everybody's saying the same thing. Data is saturated. I think this is pretty clear that we can take this and validate with a bigger number of people and participants. So that's the point to when you know that you did enough. Sorry, I have our alarm set. you did enough usability user research with the qualitative participants, research participants. Was it clear?
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No, not at all. All right, so I already spent 45 minutes, so I have to fast forward. I have a few more slides left. I promise you, I'm not going to keep you too long here. So I wanted to go over the research differences between centralized organization and embedded teams. So my company is structured in a how to say, centralized way. So you see on the left diagram, design organization has HCD team who's literally coaching everybody about the value of human-centered design. And they have research team who's dedicated for design research, but then they kind of empowers other designers to do it themselves as well. And there's individual designers, but then they are all in this design organization. And there's other product teams, which is marked with pink, and marketing team and legal and compliance teams. They are all separated. So for example, my line of business, which is the mortgage loan, I'm still within the design organization, but I work closely with the product teams who's supporting the loan part of the design. So I have my work from them, but I also am listening and hearing the orders from my design organization. And the budget is coming from the product team, but it has to be approved through different channels at the same time. So it's not like my team's manager has a superpower to check off and sign off for any studies. No, I have to go through marketing team to make sure this is not stepping their toes, because they have agreements with studies that get designers can conduct and not being able to conduct. And I have to go through legal and compliance team to make sure the study is not violating anything. And then I have to get my budget approved from product teams to conduct a study for their line of businesses. And then I get to conduct a study. Whereas as if there's embedded teams, your manager almost got the superpower as long as your team has a budget. If your team needs a research need to be done, and this person can check off and then sign off on the paper, and now boom, you got it all. You can do the research within your team. But here's the pros and cons to it though, because your company might be running the same research over and over time, because the embedded teams, because the individual managers can sign off on this very similar studies, and they'll be maybe conducting the same studies all at the same time and not knowing what's going on, not sharing those information. But whereas the centralized org, because there's probably one source of the person who's signing off on all that, they are minimizing the risk for the same studies being conducted over and over. So there's the pros and cons. It takes a lot longer time for centralized org to run any studies, because there's very complicated chain of commands who need to sign this off. So I just wanted to share this to give you some ideas how different it could be for any organizations to run and research. All right, so that is it about today's diary study. And now is the Q&A time. Please ask away any questions you have.
I'll jump in if no one else has one.
Sure.
Question. So yeah, you were saying that this is definitely obviously a qualitative research, but are there ways of extracting quantitative data from any of these diary studies?
Oh, absolutely. That is a very good question. So to extract quantitative data sets, this is how I do it, okay? Before I walk into the research session, I set the variables that need to be collected from the participants particularly, okay? So, and the variables has to have a matching set. The reason I'm saying that they have to have a matching set is so that you can measure it at the end. So I'll give you a tangible example. So for home buying experience, I really want to make sure this person is having a sentiment about price of the home, okay? For the price of the home, for this valuable to have a matching set, I have to know low price or high price and make sure this has been asked in any type of question. So the users, the participants answer in a form of this, how do I say, linear variables. So I ask a question like, so tell me more about your experience about purchasing home in terms of paying for the house. How was it? And then kind of probe on the price part of it so that they can tell me, answer whether they feel the housing market price is too high or too low. Okay, so let's say I get these answers from 18 people. And at the end of the study, I start dot mapping that in that linear bar. And then I'll have participants, I'm just giving you an example, participants 1 to 6 mapped on the low side of the bar, and then 7 to 12, 18 mapped on the high side of the bar. Okay, so now I have two distinctively different group answered this question in very different ways, right? And I make multiple sets of different variables, not just this. So what other thing can be is emotional reaction to, let's say, realtor, okay? So let's say I heavily depend on realtor versus I do not depend on realtor. I want to do it all by myself. So I ask questions related to that. So how did you go about to home search? And these person, like half of the people, let's say, oh, I totally depended on my realtor. And then half of the people said, oh, I all did myself. I didn't want to talk to any realtors. Okay. And then I put it in a linear form. And then this time, surprisingly, 7 to 12 was marked in no, I'm going to do it all by myself. And then 1 to 6 was marked into, oh, no, I'm going to do it with realtor. So now after all these variables mapped, you will see a pattern rising up. And then you can totally separate these groups utilizing this qualitative result, but then quantified in a way you can separate them, if that makes sense to you. And so then with that, you can present it to your stakeholders. Hey, this is the groups of people who answer these qualitative questions. And then, but then I was able to separate them in a visually that's clearly in diagram shows difference between these people groups. Right. So then you can drive personas from there, or you can even utilize a big data if you want to really validate that. And then on your website, you might be able to completely separate those segments and then utilize them as well in a quantitative way, if that makes sense.
Yep, no, it does. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, no, not at all. I hope my hand motion was enough for your visualization.
Oh,
And
works.
Minseon, we also have some questions in the chat.
Oh, sure.
Aaron asked, unless you want to come off mute, Aaron, you can ask your question, or I can.
Sure. Sorry, I just don't want to interrupt. I was thinking about your question, Julian, and I was wondering if you were able to, like, I'm not sure how you're tracking like user behavior in your platform, but I was wondering if you could like correlate users in your study and the behavior and actions they perform on the platforms, like if they like take action on a mortgage and correlating that to like a specific day in the diary study and trying to like use quantitative data from your platform to like correlate it with that qualitative data from the study.
Absolutely. I mean, I wish I could have done that. So here's the thing. So we knew participants' login ID. Okay, it is all available. However, because of compliance, you are not allowed in my bank. You're not allowed to see their data log once they're in the interview loop. You have to completely separate those two, and you're not supposed to see that. It's nonsense, right? But because of compliance, we had all this behavior data we can hook back up into, and we weren't able to do that. But yes, that's one way that you can totally do, Julian, if you are conducting one and then your company allow you to peek into the user's behavior data. Totally, you can validate whether they are telling you lie or true. Yes.
It's a good point, though, to understand what you're capable of collecting and what you're allowed to collect as well, which could change the way you approach a study if you know that you're not going to be able to gather certain information, or at least garner any useful information from it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Bobby has a question too. Bobby, would you like to jump in, or I can read that for you?
I guess, would you ever use, like, from getting the data into quant, would you ever use something like a sentiment analysis or any other kinds of like I guess linguistic analysis ways? Or
Yes, so I personally did not conduct linguistic analysis because of the shortage of the manpower in my team. But then we looked into the potential possibility, because diary study, the great thing is it's all recorded, right? And therefore the recordings come with transcript. Okay, when transcript available, that you can do linguistic analysis by running it with the tools that's available out there. So by doing so for those who doesn't have who's not familiar with the linguistic analysis tool, let's say your tool has a rule set up by you can set it up like filter all these positive words, and then you type in like positive words in there so the system can filter, and then you run the transcript through it, and then it will highlight those positive words that user said, and then see 60% of this user's comments are positive, therefore this person must be feeling positive. And it just spins out all these insights for you and saves your time, bunch of time. So yes, we did look into that opportunity. We weren't able to utilize that because two problems, manpower, as I said. The second thing is transcript is not always 100% accurate.
Yeah, especially if you're like, have someone from the Valley, like, you know, like, anyway, that was a terrible
Can you?
joke.
No, I mean, you can seriously copy that accent. I would like to listen.
And also we've got another question from, sorry, I just scrolled, from Joe.
Yes, thank you for the session today. I was just wondering if you're like a small startup, and how would you go about deciding which research method to use, and also, you know, where and how would you screen the participants?
So for this question, I'd like to give Matt a chance to answer. Yes, you.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. So the first part was which research method for a startup? Is that right?
Yeah.
So I think it really depends, right? Everything in UX is it depends, but it really, in my opinion, it's all like what's going to get you the most value. And for a startup, really, it's like what's going to get you the most value with the least amount of effort. So I think, you know, doing some user interviews, some contextual inquiry, it depends on what you're doing. Like if it's a startup for, you know, something in med tech, like getting the opportunity to like just do some research with, you know, some folks that work in a hospital, some nurses, whatever, is going to be a lot more valuable than like, you know, tagging people at a Starbucks and offering to buy their coffee for some research. So yeah, I don't know. It really depends. I don't know that a diary study would be, well, I guess because it's a very generative process. Like, again, it depends. Like it's depending on what kind of startup you are, a diary study could be very valuable because you could explore the space that somebody is working in currently and then think about how you could you know, bring technology in to make their lives easier. And a diary study could bring you a wealth of insights in that realm. But on the other hand, like it could take a while to conduct. I don't know, Minseon, what would you add to that?
So you have to think about your resources first. If you're a solo designer and researcher, let me be honest, this can kill you at work. So you got to make sure that your capacity first, and then think about the purpose of the research. What do you want to get out of it? What's the end result you're expecting? So based upon that, you have to find a feasible study that is most, how do I say, supporting your situation, budget-wise, manpower-wise, and then evaluate it. You just don't go for it because it is the tool to go for it. No, when you're in startup setting, that's dangerous.
Yeah, I think it's like, especially, you know, when you're you know, trying to get the most bang for your buck, like we're not scientific method researchers. I think that's like one of the things that I always like to say for UX research, like we're not wearing lab coats. We don't need to have like perfectly scientific reproducible methods or anything. It's like, how can you spend the least amount of money to get the most amount of value for understanding your customers and their needs and how you can solve their problems and provide them value in a way that they'll want to pay you for, right? And I guess it goes the same for the second part of the question around recruiting. Recruiting can be one of the hardest parts of user research, especially if you're like a totally new something and you don't have a client base already, you maybe can't pull from current customers to recruit. So figuring out how to attract participants or engage with them. I mean, like, I don't know, like again, it really depends on the type of startup you are. Like your best bet might be running Instagram ads, or your best bet might be running to a Starbucks, or your best bet might be, you know, connecting with, you know, people in a certain industry through an industry conference or something. You know, it really depends on what startup you are and the area you're working in.
Absolutely. And
well, and I want to jump in a little bit because not all startups are super small. You may work for a large company that has a very small UX team as well. So this answer could span across, but it really comes down to what your budget is for the exercise that you're trying to do. So it loops into what Matt said, but I don't think this is exclusive to startup. And I've been a part of startups that have 600 people in them. So or more, because they've grown to that point, or you know, we've seen some companies that are still in startup phase, unicorn companies that have very large groups. But if you're thinking about like, how do you screen the participants and stuff, that's another part of your question. And you do need a screener for anything you're trying to do to identify what type of participant is appropriate for you. And there's a lot of software solutions out there now. Minseon had a D-Scout was one of the tools.
Oh, yes.
D-Scout's pretty expensive, right? So that might not be one of the tools, but there are other user research tools out there that you can say, I want 50 people, and maybe like when you grab a subscription with them for a month, they give you 200 folks. So that screener can help you filter them out. And that's great depending on if you're not a specialized industry, right? If you're a specialized industry, it might become a little bit more challenging to find the technical folks or people in the medical space or whatever, but a screener will help you identify that. A lot of times, if they can't find the users that you need to get feedback from, you won't even have to pay for that service because they weren't able to get you what you needed. So the industry has come a long way, I guess is what I'm saying. So look at some of the tools and see what they offer, because they can help you find the people that you don't have to go to the Starbucks or wherever. You can use the tools to get people across the country, which is pretty cool. You have to be careful because some of those folks are just in that for the money, right? They're just like clicking yes, 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 and you know, trying to answer the questions the right way. So identifying the right users is important, but there are tools out there that can help you these days, which is good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you for chiming in.
I think we've got some other ones here. Sorry, I put myself back on mute and didn't get back to the chat here. I'm going to try to say your name, but Kajado, you have a question?
Yeah, it's Kajito.
Kajito, sorry about that. Thank you for
fine. I was asking if your if the diary entries are videos, if you utilize like behavior analysis for the body language of the video feed, just in case it kind of conflicts with the linguistic analysis. Like, for example, when some people are having a bad day, maybe they're sarcastic with the, you know, it's going great, today's awesome, the market's looking great, or something like that. If you haven't like coached them not to do stuff like that, because you were saying that it would screen for like positive words. Is there something to counter that if that happens?
So, I mean, you're really good at pointing out things that all happened in our study. So first thing first, I did not use linguistic analysis, okay? And then some of the problem is that it doesn't read the sarcasm. Okay, so that's there for sure. And what happened is our participants, most of them recorded their video at the end of the day, right before they go to bed. So they are very tired, you can see, super tired. And then so they're saying very positive stuff, supposedly like, oh yeah, today was a really good day. We were able to find a few homes. But then like, you can see this person's really tired. So you got to really listen. And again, I was like, is this person saying things positively, or is it sarcasm? And so you really have to look and understand it later on after watching this person's video like 30 times, because you get like 90 videos to watch. You kind of really understand the body language and then facial expressions. But then in the beginning, it was very confusing. Some people were like saying negative stuff, but then with smiley face, and some people are the other way around. So you really need to read the context, and then follow-up interview does help for that matter. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let me see. Ryan has a question here too.
This is very, very hard. Correlation. Okay. Yeah, correlation does not equal causation. Let's see. Let me think. And Wes, if
I'll read the question off just so everybody, in case they don't see the chat. What's a good response to the objection that correlation does not equal causation?
You're right. You're right. This is one of the main things that every qualitative researchers who synthesize data throughout a finish diagram session had to answer at some point of time, because we draw a conclusion and make that as like, okay, this is insight we find, but then we have to derive in there by doing a bunch of guessing work, why this could have happened, why this person ended up behaving this way. And then we just pour out our insight into and then ideate upon it to conclude, right? But then it is more of a almost like making a leap out of data at that point. So you're right. In my opinion, it is really hard to prove. Okay, correlation does not equal to causation for sure. But when you think of a design thinking exercise and a framework as a whole, the reason we do design thinking exercise and a data synthesis session together is to make sure that we base our creative ideas on the solid data that we had, but then we're not one-on-one creating ideas out of data. We are taking a leap to create something different, but it is still grounded on the data, but it is not directly related. It is very creative still, right? So to get there, I wouldn't say this is an objection. It is okay that you cannot answer that. You cannot answer that this is not like, yeah, correlation does not equal to causation, but it's okay, because that's how design thinking makes people to be creative from the data. So that's my opinion. But what do you guys think?
And it goes back to what is the purpose of the research that you're trying to do. So if we look back at past conversations that we've had, sometimes it's all about building assumptions off of what we're hearing. That doesn't mean that we're making conclusions off of those. Those assumptions then can be validated too by taking some sort of action around it. So you don't always have to make like a conclusion out of it. You can, but you don't always have to, and it depends on what type of feedback you're finding as you go through it. So just keep that in mind. Like sometimes research will bring up new questions that you need to answer, and that is just part of the discovery process. I think with that, we are at almost at 8:50, so I do want to respect everybody's time and try to wrap up here. So, hey, how about everybody? Let's thank Minseon for this wonderful presentation. Thanks for pulling together that Figma board. It was really fun messing around in FigJam. Yeah, and that was a cool approach to the exercise as well, which is pretty cool. Let me see. And of course, please, if you want to throw in the chat your LinkedIn to connect with other folks out there. And Minseon, if you don't mind dropping your LinkedIn in there to share if someone has not connected with you, that might be cool to do some follow-up questions or even learn more about her journey.
Yeah, actually it's in the FigJam board. So everybody already has access to it.
Awesome, cool. So hunt that down. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now. But thank you, Minseon.